All right, everybody, welcome back to Horn Takes. The tournament field is set, so we're going to do another edition of the Bullpen. Got a lot to talk about. We'll start off with Texas's disastrous showing in the Big 12 tournament, and I'll just go ahead and say it, man. I think it cost them a shot at hosting a regional. Before, leading up to it, we kept saying that there was a lot of things that had to happen, and then they swept West Virginia, and I think that kind of changed. And they did it really impressively, and I think that kind of changed probably a lot of perspectives across the important people in college football that get to decide all that stuff. And then they just laid an absolute egg. That you can't even, egg is not even, doesn't even begin to describe how terrible that effort was for Texas baseball in the Big 12 tournament. So let's get into a little bit about that. Heading into the tournament, we thought, Texas was in the right side of the bracket. We thought they were in the right division of the Big 12 tournament. They had won series against every single team in that division. They'd only lost 3 games total against every team in that division. Kansas State, TCU. TCU kind of would have been a worry. A talented team. But Kansas and Kansas State shouldn't have been teams that were able to beat Texas, especially this late in the game, late in the season. And they did, man. And it was bad. Starting pitching, let's just go down the list. We'll just talk a little bit about this Big 12 tournament. Starting pitching was actually pretty good. Lucas Gordon scattered 7 hits over 5 innings. Gave up 2 runs. He had 5 Ks and a walk in his start against Kansas. So probably not his best outing. He certainly didn't go as deep as he normally does. It just seemed like he struggled early with command. There was a few walks early on in the game, but he was always able to pitch around things. And actually, like I said, he only gave up 1 walk, but we did scatter those hits. He did scatter those hits. So I think he was struggling a little bit with command, and KU was taking advantage of that and getting the ball in play. But generally speaking, pretty decent outing by Lucas Gordon. And then in the top of the 7th, Staley gives up a single, a walk, an intentional walk, which was a walk to get around a guy that was 2 for 3 already in the game and get to a guy that was 0 for 3 in the game so far. Right after that intentional walk, he works a 3-2 count. He was battling a little bit, and then he gives up a grand slam. And ultimately, that was the difference in the game. Texas had tied the game at 2 in the 6th, the bottom of the 6th inning. And, man, offensively, and we'll get into this a little more, it was just a struggle for Texas all tournament, 2 games of the tournament. And then Staley gave up another walk immediately after the grand slam, which made it a 6-2 game before he was able to record the final out in the 7th. And that's all the scoring that occurred in that game. Then you move on to game 2 against Kansas State. LBJ came out and scattered 8 hits over 6 innings, gave up 2 runs. He had 2 Ks and 0 walks. So he wasn't giving up free bases. He did give up some hits. He wasn't as effective with the strikeouts as he has been, generally speaking, this season. But I think it's a positive that, he didn't give up any walks and give up 2 runs. I mean, you get through 6 innings, having given up 2 runs, generally you would say, man, Texas is in a pretty good spot right now, especially the way their offense is played up until the tournament. But at that point, they had 0 runs. And then in the top of the 7th, Shaw comes on for LBJ after LBJ gave off a leadoff single in the 7th. He gives up a walk, a single, a walk before he finally records one out. And then they replace him for Hurley, who gives up a single and a walk, and he finally records one out. And then Morehouse comes on and gives up a 2-run double before getting a ground ball to end another really rough top of the 7th for Texas. So the 7th inning, defensively, and not really defensively, is really pitching, really hurt Texas in this tournament from a sort of defensive perspective, runs allowed perspective. All the damage happened in the 7th inning. They dropped that game, I believe it was 6-0. The offense. So again, story of the season. Let me back up on the pitching. Story of the season, the starting pitching was pretty good. The bullpen was atrocious. Now we move along to the offense. It was terrible. It was a shit show. It was the worst they have played all season. They scored 3 runs total in 2 games, averaged 1.5 runs per game. Two of those runs were solo shots by Jack O'Dowd in game 1. They only scored, so they did score a run in the second game. The top 6 hitters, and this is a, if you've been listening to the show or seen some clips on TikTok or anything like that, this is where you'll really understand what went wrong. The top 6 hitters for Texas all year long, and especially late, like this last third of the season, have just been killing it. And when they haven't killed it as a group, there's always been some guys kind of step up and provide some offense. So we've seen them run the gamut of every last one of them is mashing the ball to maybe a few of them are struggling, but the other few continue to pick them up, continue to be hot. And it's different guys every week, different guys every game that play either one of those roles. To in this tournament, just absolutely being useless. They went 5 for 45, which is 111, with 1 RBI through 2 games against 2 of the worst teams in the Big 12. And they only had 1 hit as a group in the elimination game against Kansas State. Struck out 8 times in game 2, again, an elimination game. 9 total for the tournament. And the team average for the whole tournament, the entire team average for the whole tournament was 137. So the top 6 hitters, these guys that are all hitting over 300, some of them close to 400, managed to hit below a really terrible team average of 137 through 2 games. 11 hits total for Texas hitters in 2 games, and 21 Ks total for the teams. That's pretty rough. That's over 10 a game. It's not good. So the offense really, really let Texas down. I mean, I think both of those games were winnable despite the bullpen doing what the bullpen's been doing lately and melting down, giving up leads or giving up runs late in games. I think if the offense would have showed up at all, then they might have had a chance in those 2 games. So obviously for Texas, for the team, for the coaching staff, I'm sure, for the fans, I'm 100% sure, was just an epically disappointing tournament. Just really bad. We talked on the show prior to the tournament about, Texas. You look at them, they kind of have to be the favorite. They're the number 1 seed in the tournament. Maybe not the favorite to win the tournament, but certainly the favorite to win their division of the tournament, which is just the other side of the bracket. 4 teams on one side, 4 teams on the other. And then we thought West Virginia had to be the favorite in the other division. And we talked about how that division was pretty tough, though. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Texas Tech. A lot of firepower on that side of the division. And I think West Virginia went 2-out too. You just never know in tournament baseball, and you certainly don't know. We talk about getting hot at the right time. We've been talking about that for the last half of the season, and as especially how it relates to moving into the NCAA tournament, and how teams just kind of pop out of nowhere. I mean, Ole Miss last year wasn't even supposed to be in the there was debate whether Ole Miss should even be in the tournament when they got selected to be in the tournament, and they won the whole damn thing. And the reason they won the whole damn thing is they got hot and they just stayed hot. So state of the program address as we sit today, 38-20, not great. 18 games better than we thought they'd be. As we started the season, we thought this was a 500 team. They've dropped out of the top 25 again. So this team didn't start the year in the top 25 and battled their way into the top 25 and actually pretty highly ranked into the top. I mean, I wouldn't swear to it, but I think at some point they were sitting at top 15 team in the country, which, all things considered would be a really good place for that team to wind up if they could have maintained it. And then they spent the last third of the season falling in and out of it, back and forth, back and forth. None of that really matters as we sit today. They're in the show. They're in the regionals. They get an opportunity to go do it again. What's up, Chris? Chris on my live stream. That's who I'm talking to for you folks that may just be listening to the podcast. Pitching conversation is the same conversation we've been having. Starting pitching is pretty decent. Lucas Gordon is good. LBJ is good. Tanner Witt is starting to come on late in the season. For those of you that don't know, Tommy John surgery. Didn't get to start pitching until just a few games ago. He's getting better every start. He's able to throw more pitches every start, get deeper into the games. We obviously didn't get to see Witt in the Big 12 tournament, so we don't know what he may or may not have been able to do, or what that would have looked like. Really, Texas needs him to, over the course of this tournament, if they can continue to advance, they really need him to turn into a solid third guy that can give you, I'd say at least 5 innings. The bullpen is an absolute unmitigated clusterfuck of a disaster. And that ain't changing. Matter of fact, it's getting worse, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Really, really disappointing, though, to see that group, because there was a stretch this season where that group, and a lot of the guys, the group did really well. You take, I don't know how many guys sit in that bullpen, maybe 10, let's say 10 to 15 guys, which I could be way off on that. Let's say there's 10 guys in the bullpen that are consistently in and out of the game. You take a group of 10 guys and have them do anything, and they're going to have their moments where they're really good. They're going to have their moments where they're really bad. But as a group, you might say that group, despite the fact that some of them are struggling right now, that group is doing really well. It's doing its job, right? And for a while, they did that, and they did it really well. And I don't know what happened. They just drove off a cliff. The bullpen that you see today for the University of Texas baseball program does not look and I'm not just talking guys, I'm talking results, looks absolutely nothing like it did mid-season. They got into late season form in the mid-season, and now in the late season, they're in preseason form. It is bad. Hey, what's up, Josh? Another guy checking it out on the live stream. Offense, man, there is a ton of ability with this offense, with this lineup. like I said, like we've been talking about, they got 6 guys right now that are hitting over 300. That's really good. A couple of those guys are really close to 400, which is really good. Not the same type of power team that we saw last year, but still really respectable in terms of home runs. I think they've hit 85 for the season. Lots of doubles, lots of triples. It's a team that can hit the ball and hit the ball for extra base hits, especially that 1 through 6. Those 1 through 6 spots in the lineup are really good. The problem is they can get really, really cold as an entire group, which is what we saw in the Big 12 tournament, which is what we've seen in other series in Big 12 play. And the further you go in the tournament, the harder that's going to get. Like, you're facing better pitching. You're facing better teams offensively, which can put pressure on hitters from opposing teams to really go out and produce. And I think that's one of the problems. I think when this offensive team is just kind of there and they're just really focused on what's in front of them right now, they're not worried about what the score is or what this other lineup could do. They're just playing sort of within themselves. They're really good. I mean, they're probably as potent as any other offense in the country. Certainly up there, like you could put them in the conversation with a lot of those really potent offensive teams. But they just go into these moments where they're just really cold. And in the tournament, what I felt like I saw in the Big 12 tournament was they looked at a lot of really good pitches. And we've talked about this before earlier in the season when they were struggling. They watched a lot of really good pitches go over the plate. And you guys are free to have your own thoughts and opinions on taking pitches. I think it's stupid. Especially if you're dealing with a pitcher that is really going to try to get ahead with a first pitch fastball. Now, some of the better guys, they can throw a lot of their off-speed stuff for strikes, and those are tough, right? You get in the batter's box, you're looking at fastball. Is what you should be looking for. You should be sitting on a fastball for the first couple of pitches of an at-bat. And if you get it, man, you've got to go after it. You can't sit there and watch the best pitch you're going to get the entire at-bat cruise right over the plate. And then you got to start battling off a bunch of junk. And then, at that point it becomes like a mind game with the pitcher, and he's in a mind game with you, trying to make you guess wrong, and you're trying to put him in a position where you think he's got to throw you another fastball now because the count is what it is, whatever it is. But I don't know if that's something that's coached or if it's just, them being timid because of the situation. I don't know. Whatever it is, they need to fix that because that's going to bite them in the ass. If I know you're just going to watch the first pitch, I'm going to groove the first pitch and I'm going to get ahead of you 1-0 or 0-1. The one bright spot for the offense right now, really, and this was like, besides O'Dowd's 2 solo shots, and one of them was an absolute blast. He put that thing over the center field wall. It was a good shot. That's a big field at Globe Life. I think it's 370 down the line, 410. No, excuse me. It's 370 in the power alleys, and it's 410 in center field. And I think down the lines you're looking at 330 to 345, just depending on what part of the park you're looking at. I don't think it's completely symmetrical. Anyways, the shot he hit to center field was a blast. Besides those two things, really, Dylan Campbell's extending his 35-game hitting streak was like sort of the big positive note for the offense. That's how pathetic the offense was the last 2 games. Definitely got to fix that. They got to be more competitive at the plate. They got to have more competitive at bats. And now we talked about this a little bit a show ago about injuries. Texas really hasn't had to deal with a lot of injuries this year outside of Tanner Witts, but that's an injury That's a different circumstance, in my opinion. You knew coming into the season you weren't going to have Tanner Witt. It's not like you had him and then you lost him. So now we're talking about guys that David Pierce has been depending on for a lot of the season that all of a sudden aren't going to be there anymore. Let's talk about it. Tanner Carlson, we touched on it a little bit last time. He had some sort of like brace or cast on his arm for the senior day ceremonies there at Dish Falk. He broke his arm. And this is a guy that sort of had solidified himself in the DH role. He was hitting over 300, really starting to come on and become another weapon offensively. 1 through 6, always, I won't say always, usually pretty hot. And then 7, 8, 9, just kind of hit or miss. He was a guy that could sit in that 7, 8, 9 spot and give you 300 type numbers. David Shaw, we saw him throwing in the Big 12 tournament, and after one pitch, just my arm. I don't know the nature of it, but I don't think he's going to play anymore this season. And Heston Toll is out the rest of the season, and those two guys are out according to Horn 247 Jeff Howe. So I don't know if they'll make the trip to Coral Gables, but they certainly aren't going to throw. And those are guys that David Pierce has depended on a lot out of the bullpen, and they're guys that have really good ability. It hasn't always showed up on the field, but it also has at times showed up on the field. This isn't an injury, but DJ Burke is in the portal. It's the guy. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened with DJ Burke. He hasn't thrown since April 8th, I believe, is the last time he came into a game. And this may have something to do with the reason he's transferring, but this guy was sitting at 2.22 ERA in 15 appearances. He had a couple of games earlier in the year where he did really well out of the bullpen. He's already in the portal, so he's not going to make the trip. So you got a shitty bullpen that's really struggling to find guys that can throw strikes consistently, keep the ball in the park, keep the ball out of the power alleys. And now 3 of those guys are gone. Won't play in the NCAA tournament. So I think at this point, as we head into the regional, you got to ask yourself, what could this team possibly do to advance out of this regional? Which is the goal, right? They're there to advance, and they're there to try to figure out a way to wind up in Omaha, right? Well, I think the biggest question is, offensive rhythm. Can they get into an offensive, and they do not need to be 22 runs a game like we've seen them this year a couple times. They don't need to do that. I think they consistently need to be anywhere between 6, 7 runs and 10 runs a game for them to realistically have a shot to advance to Omaha. And let's just forget that talk. Let's forget that discussion. Let's just talk about this regional. Same thing. They're going to have to score some runs. So can that group of 6 that, we've seen just absolutely go on tears and then absolutely not do shit, can they just be consistent? And can we just get some guys to step up throughout the course of a game, get some timely hits, get some balls over the fence? That's the question. And the answer is, I don't have a freaking clue what we're going to see out of this group. I think the Coral Gables regional doesn't have a lot of great pitching in it. Anywhere. Talking about this team, and this is a future thing, but David Pierce has a lot of work to do in the portal. He attempted last year, and I think his offensive portal moves were really good. Porter Brown, Garrett Guillemette, Tanner Carlson. He brought in some guys in the portal that could hit the ball, and they proved they could hit the ball. So I think offensively, you got to give him a really good grade for his portal moves last year. Pitching, the pitching has been pretty brutal. At times, some of those guys have produced really well, but on the whole, they just haven't been a group that has done well, and they're just not consistent. And now they're getting consistent, but it's consistently bad, and it's been that way for, I don't know, probably the last 3 series of the season, and then certainly this Big 12 tournament. But I think David Pierce has got to find a shortstop, because I still don't think Mitchell Daly is the answer there. He's gonna have to possibly find a lot of outfielders, because some of those guys are probably not coming back. Eric Kennedy is definitely not coming back. Dylan Campbell may not be coming back. Porter Brown may not be coming back. Yeah, I mean, there's the potential that he loses the entire outfield. So he's got to go find some outfielders. And I don't know what the recruiting class looks like. Baseball recruiting is really sucking hind tit on information being available out there. Good information. He's going to have to find another catcher. Ryan Galvan is a freshman. Pretty good defensively. Has shown sparks offensively. And maybe he settles in, maybe with a year of experience under his belt, he settles in and he can become that kind of guy that Garrett Guillemette became this year, both offensively and defensively. But either way, he's going to have to find one for depth. And then the pitching, he's going to get all his starters back. Well, no, he may not. Lucas Gordon may move on. I think Lucas Gordon probably will move on. He's going to be a pretty highly ranked draft pick, I think. But he'll get 2 of his 3 guys back, which is better than last year where they lost 2 out of 3. But he's got to figure out something with the bullpen. He's got to get some more consistency and some guys he can depend on and put them into certain roles and say, this is what you're going to be for us. He still hasn't figured that out. And I don't think it's totally his fault. Like, I don't think he's just mixing things up to mix things up. I think he just is really kind of at a loss. What can I do with what I've got? But then you go back to it, and ultimately that's his problem. He's the one that brought all those guys in. He's the one that said, these are the guys I need to be successful at the University of Texas, and it just hasn't worked out. So he's got a pretty steep – I think he's got just as steep of an uphill battle with getting that roster rebuilt this year as he did last year. And it's really tough to compete if you don't have any kind of continuity and if you're constantly having to rebuild things. It certainly isn't a recipe for success. So let's talk about this Coral Gables regional a little bit. Let's set it up. Texas, their 62nd tournament appearance. That is nuts. There's been 76 tournaments, and they've been in it 62 times. This is a team that's, we talked on the show a few weeks ago about just like if you sit down and do the numbers, how amazing it is how many times Texas has been to the College World Series, and I couldn't remember the percentage. They've reached the College World Series 38 times. That's 62% of the times they've been in the tournament. I don't think there's a basketball team on the planet that has made it to the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament 62% of the time. So really, Texas hasn't been, well, I mean, I guess towards the rest of the world's, the rest of the country's standards, there's not a lot of teams that can say we we need to be in Omaha like every single season. And I think Texas is one of those teams consistently. They got 6 College World Series titles, 6 runner-ups. Last championship was in 2005. They've had some pretty decent deep runs since then. But generally, their tournaments, their College World Series portion of the tournament has been pretty quickly over with, short-lived. They're the number 2 seed going into this regional. I think they're like the 25th seed overall in the whole thing. Not that that matters. So first game up tomorrow afternoon, 1 o'clock. They play the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. I don't know a lot about this team. They're 40-22, so they've got a good record. I was going back and kind of looking at their schedule, looking at some of the games they've played. They won a midweek over LSU back in April. LSU spent a whole hell of a lot of time sitting at number 1 this season. This team knocked out number 8 Coastal Carolina out of the Sun Belt tournament in back-to-back elimination games for them. I believe Coastal Carolina is hosting a regional, and if they advance, we'll host a super regional. You look at their numbers; they kind of resemble this Texas team. They've got a tad bit higher team ERA from a pitching perspective. Something that really surprised me. I feel like there was a Raging Cajun team, and maybe I'm getting my smaller Louisiana schools confused. But I felt like a few years ago, there was a Raging Cajun baseball team that just absolutely massacred the baseball one season. And so I kind of just figured that this team was the same way. They're not. They've only hit 66 home runs this season, which is about 20 shy of what Texas has done. They do have more triples and more doubles than Texas, not by much either one of those areas. And they're fielding over 98%. So that's, I haven't looked. 98% is what Texas has hovered around all season long. And there was times where, Texas was in the top 20 in fielding percentage. So I imagine 98% will get you in the top 25 for fielding percentage. As we said, game 1 is tomorrow, 1 o'clock. That game will be on ESPN Plus, but also Longhorn Network. Really important for Texas to win that first game. Heading into the Big 12 tournament, we said, man, you got to win the first game. Any tournament format, you got to win the first game. And then ideally, you can win that second game. If you can win the first and second game in a regional, you're in really, really good shape. If you can win the first game in a regional, you're in pretty good shape. I think especially for this Texas team, though, it is very important that the offense shows up. It shows up early. It shows up in a big way, and they put their opponents to sleep before the 6th, 7th inning. Put them in a position where mentally they don't think they can come back. Physically, it would be very hard for them to do all the right things to come back. That's what Texas is going to have to do for the rest of this season if they want to continue to play and hopefully end up in Omaha. Because they just don't have the pitching. They didn't have the pitching a week ago, and the pitching situation has gotten markedly worse for them. Look at the rest of this regional. You got Miami's the number 9 overall seed. They take on Maine at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. That's Central Time. Both of those times are Central, 1 p.m. Central and 6 p.m. Central. That's going to be on ESPN Plus, I'm sure. Miami's a 40-19 team. They finished second in the Coastal Division in the ACC. Clemson busted them up pretty bad. I think the score was 11-5 in the ACC tournament championship game. This team hits a lot of home runs. I don't remember the exact count. I think it's like 100 and close to 115 home runs, I believe Miami hit this year. But Miami kind of has, I wouldn't say it's Miami's another one of those teams that you look at over the course of at least my lifetime, and you say, you know, they've been to a lot of College World Series during that time, but they've struggled a lot lately to advance out of their own region and to advance out of super regionals. So they're definitely the kind of team that, although they have a really good record and their resume looks really good this year, they should win this regional. They just have kind of like that cloud hanging over them. Never know what might happen with Miami in the postseason. I mentioned earlier the pitching in this regional is not all that great, and Miami's, for being a team that's ranked ninth, you know, the overall ninth seed in the tournament, they got a 5.12 team ERA, and you look at their starters. None of their starters have a really good ERA. There's a kid named Gage Zeal, and obviously I've not watched Miami all season. I just kind of went back to the last few series of the regular season, tried to figure out, you know, who their rotation was, and what I think I found was this Gage Zeal kid is kind of their Friday night guy. He's a 4.61 ERA. Then you got Alejandro Rosario, who's 7.45 ERA, that I think pitched a lot of Saturday games for him, second games. Then you got Ronaldo Gallo, who's a 6.81 ERA guy that pitched a lot of third or Sunday games. They're getting a kid back named Carson Ligon. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Ligon. That's the big talk for them, is they've got this guy back and available. What is his role going to be? He's a 4.25 ERA guy. The one guy that looks super impressive to me is their closer, Andrew Walters. He's a 1.08 ERA. I think in any game during this regional, if they can get to Walters with the lead, it's going to be pretty tough for whoever they're playing to eat into him. But overall, the pitching is not super impressive for Miami. So, you know, there's not many teams this year that don't have like some pretty bad weaknesses. But I think one you definitely don't want to have heading into the postseason in college baseball is pitching problems. Miami's just under 90% fielding team, so they're, you know, they're right outside of that upper echelon of fielding teams. So that tells me you got a pitching staff that gives up a lot of runs. You got a fielding, you know, a team that doesn't field quite at an elite level. Let's get the ball in play and see what happens. I don't really have any predictions because, man, I just feel like predictions are so. I feel like if you get a prediction right in this postseason baseball tournament, it was almost luck. I mean, there's your obvious ones. Like, I feel like, well, there's always obvious ones. Tennessee was obvious. Arkansas was obvious the last couple of years. Neither one of those teams made it to Omaha in the obvious year where you go, they're going to do it. Like, they're going to make it to Omaha, and they're going to be really tough to knock off for the national championship. 2 years in a row, those teams didn't even make it. So I don't think you can say there's obvious. Baseball is a funny game, and so I'm not going to make any predictions. I'll tell you what my gut tells me. My gut tells me that Texas is going to somehow figure out a way to be competitive in this regional. And they're going to somehow figure out a way to advance. This is what my gut tells me. And I'm not even sure why it's telling me that. I can't point to anything specific. I think it's like an opposite day thing. Like, they were really shitty the last time they played baseball. So what this Texas team's got these ups and downs all season. They're going to be really good this weekend. That's scientific, right? That's just what my gut. I'm not predicting that. I just have a feeling, man. We'll see what happens, obviously. But if you look at this regional and you look at the super regional pairing they got with the Stanford regional, I don't think if you're a Texas fan or the Texas team and the coaching staff, you could have asked for a better pairing and a better regional to go to. And I simply mean that looking at how their season has been this year, going into it being a 2 seed, I think they probably landed in the best spot they could land at as a 2 seed for them. It may not be for everybody, but definitely for them. The pitching is not great in this regional. Miami has a tendency to piss things away. And I know we didn't talk about Maine, but honestly, I don't expect much from Maine. They're Maine. I expect Maine to be 2 and done. Join us sometime on the cheap seats. We're going to talk to Chris from the Spurs Up Show. I think we'll probably wait till after college baseball is over with and we don't have much to talk about going forward until football season. We'll get him on the show. Just hard to line up timing. That's all that deal is. And then we'll obviously have a bullpen next weekend. We'll talk about whether Texas advanced to a super regional or didn't and why those things were the case. Subscribe to the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you don't want to do that, go to horntakespodcast.buzzsprout.com. You can find all the episodes there. This one will be up quick. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can find me on TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook at Horn Takes. You can email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your comments, questions, concerns, and criticisms. I love them all. You guys have a good one. Hook 'em.